We all know that our mental health impacts how we eat, and we all know that how we eat can impact our mental health. But just knowing that isn't enough. What do we do with that information? Registered dietitian Abbey Sharp is here. Hi, Abby. Welcome to the Med Circle channel.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited about this.
Yes, and we also have lots of your fans already joining us. So a lot of
Oh,
people already know
lovely.
who you are. But just in case, I would love to start with who you are. Why don't you give it to us?
Sure. As you kind of briefly mentioned, I'm a registered dietitian. I've been, actively pushing back against diet culture for over a decade now, about 15 years. I'm also a YouTuber. I have a brand new podcast called Bite Back with Abbey Sharp, where we are constantly dismantling, diet culture rules, pseudoscience, calling out the charlatans, and really just helping people rekindle a healthy, balanced relationship with food. And
What's a big thing recently that you're calling out? When you
mm,
said the word charlatan, that piques my interest. What's
yeah,
something that you're like, gosh, I'm calling this out.
there's so many. It's just never ending stream of things I have to debunk. But I do think one that particularly irks me because I feel so asinine is the carnivore diet. I think it really goes, there's very few things that in the nutrition world that we can agree on. But I think one thing that is pretty clearly stated in the evidence is that vegetables are good for you and eating more plants is beneficial for good health. And so a diet that basically takes the completely opposite, swings in the complete opposite direction into that kind of fringe category of, only eating meat, and foods, animal-based foods that are high in saturated fats, low in beneficial fibers. And we can talk a little bit about why that's so important. But I think that that's, to me, one of the most bizarre things that is, it started out as something that I would have never guessed could have gotten as big as it did, and here we are.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah. What about these people? I have friends who take these nutritional tests basically,
Mhm.
and they apparently the results of this test will tell you this is what you should be eating and this is what you shouldn't be eating. And they literally, I'll go out to dinner with them and they will literally go, "Oh, I'm not supposed to eat broccoli or
Oh god.
Brussels sprouts." And I go, "What do you mean?" They're like, "Well, it's not good for me." I go, "What? How is that true? What? You're shaking your head no already. What's your thought on that?"
Yeah, we don't have any good evidence yet that we don't have any strong good evidence that any of these kind of tests that you can do are going to be able to tell you individually and uniquely what good or bad foods are for you. We don't even have a food intolerance test that would be able to tell you that you are intolerant to broccoli. I mean,
Really?
or anything. No, we
So
it's
that I
it's
put in the
current.
charlatan category because that's what
Right.
they're telling people.
I know, and
Wow.
unfortunately, it's rampant, and I have some empathy for everybody because this is the we're all swimming in the same water here, and it's so easy to get fooled, and that's why I have a full time job, and I'm never I'm never going to be able to retire because
Yeah.
there's so much work to be done, and it's just going to become, over time, it just builds on the misinformation builds and builds and builds, and it becomes very hard for people to trust science because they're kind of in too deep.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you on that. For people who don't know, Med Circle is where I hail from. Hello, everybody. I'm the host at Med Circle, and we have a stable of psychologists and psychiatrists that I interview. We have a community over at medcircle.com filled with people who are interested in psychology and mental health. And when I first started, I had never heard of orthorexia. Could you
Mm.
explain what this is?
Yeah. So, orthorexia is essentially, I mean, you could define it loosely as clean eating taken to an extreme, a disordered extreme. It's currently not kind of its own it's not its own diagnosis in the DSM-5 yet. It kind of like is under a larger umbrella. So it's unlike something like anorexia or bulimia, which has its own category. But it very much is acknowledged as a real problem now, which has a lot of the same implications as, more quote unquote traditional eating disorders like anorexia and bulimia that we do have more long-term data on. And it's absolutely on the rise thanks to diet culture and toxic wellness culture as we see these things proliferate online.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And a lot of people would see somebody who was, I'll use quotes, obsessive with this clean eating and go, they are killing it. I mean, look
Yeah,
at, they got the wheatgrass in the morning and the vegetables all through the day. And they would say they have a healthy relationship with food. What
right.
is your definition of having a quote healthy relationship with food?
Right. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. And that is why, unfortunately, orthorexia is so contagious. It's because
Yeah,
we normalize and we celebrate this kind of obsession with clean, pure, untoxic food as as a statement of morality and a statement of willpower
Mhm.
and control. But really, a healthy relationship with food is all about approaching eating without anxiety, without guilt, without strict rules.
Mm.
It ultimately means honoring your own hunger and fullness cues. It means enjoying a wide variety of foods and also listening to your body's needs, unique needs, rather than kind of following these external rules or diet culture messages that we see online. And it's also about allowing for flexibility. So knowing that, sometimes our food choices, I always say that food doesn't need to be nutritionally equal for us to make it morally equal. Like foods are never going to be like an apple is never going to be equivalent to a candy bar, but
Mm.
we can kind of strip them of their moral weight, of their moral value. We can knock it off its pedestal and foods just become foods. So it's knowing that food choices are not markers of moral value or our whole identity, as unfortunately, a lot of diets have become people's whole identity.
Mm.
And ultimately, that eating should be both nourishing and also enjoyable.
Hmm. So what I'm hearing is when I have that urge to drive through Arby's, I can do it.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I think that people get very scared hearing something like that because when, we talk about something called intuitive eating,
Yeah.
which is really a mind-body framework that ultimately is grounded in self-care and rejecting the diet mentality, and also kind of getting in touch with your own true needs. But I think when people hear, oh, that sounds like way too lax for me. There's no structure there. I'm just going to eat whatever I want. And if you say I can eat anything, well, like what's intuitive to me is to eat all the chips or whatever.
Mm.
Well, that might be true if you are used to restricting your diet for, for your entire life, as many
Mhm.
adults have. But what we find is over time, as we start to develop our interoceptive kind of skills, tune into our hunger and fullness cues, and also kind of let go of a lot of these kind of moralizing, dichotomizing beliefs around food, what we see is that people are able to collect data on how foods make them feel. And they actually start to learn that, you know what? I mean, I love me a cookie, but I feel a lot better if I have a cookie with some, Greek yogurt and berries rather
Mhm.
than eat a whole sleeve of cookies in one go. So it's all about collecting data, and that takes time, especially as we are unlearning a lot of the diet culture rules that we've been indoctrinated with.
Yeah.
So we have to just kind of be empathetic to ourselves and give ourselves grace as we go through this lifelong process, which it is for many people.
Yeah, I just did a workshop for our Med Circle members with a psychologist just 15 minutes before I came on to do this interview. And we were talking about how hard it is to be self-compassionate and
Mm,
how we it almost feels better sometimes to punish ourselves, to be mean to ourselves because we have control of the scenario
right.
rather than coming from this place that we know is actually better, the self-compassion place. We know that's better, but
Totally.
it just doesn't feel as like good
Right.
sometimes, you know?
Yeah.
So it takes so much work. What does your sign say behind you? Science and
Oh, it says science and sass.
oh, okay. There we
That's kind of
go.
my wherever. Yeah, that's my kind of tagline. Yeah.
I love it. Science and
Yeah.
sass. Very good.
Yeah.
Okay. Trauma.
Trauma.
You have some great stuff here about the relationship between experiencing trauma and how
Mhm.
that impacts our relationship with food.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. So, for people who have experienced trauma, like obviously everyone's experience is so unique. So it's impossible to say, oh, if you have trauma, this is what's going to happen to your eating.
Mm,
Eating patterns can vary from one extreme to the other. So for some folks may overeat as a way of emotional eating, finding comfort in food, while others may actually find themselves restricting food as a means of kind of control. But generally, oftentimes trauma can trigger a wide range of disordered eating behaviors as a way to cope with a lot of these very overwhelming emotions, or to numb oneself from, distressing, traumatic memories and experiences. And ultimately, we know that foods, especially highly palatable foods, high sugar foods, things like that, they give us a little hit of dopamine,
yes.
which may be, temporarily soothing in the short term during those kinds of like, traumatic episodes, or when we are feeling particularly, triggered or distressed. But long term can actually cause more distress. And a lot of the time, so we see folks with histories of trauma struggle with trusting their bodies, especially just depending on the reason for the trauma. They may have really difficulties recognizing hunger cues, trusting fullness cues, because any experience in their body may feel painful or unsafe, and they may have trained themselves to essentially separate themselves from their body in a lot of ways. So what we see is what we call like poor interoceptive skills, and ultimately that leads to a lot of challenges with hearing hunger and fullness cues until they are basically like at the extreme levels. So where, a normal, intuitive eater may be able to eat when they are feeling the early signs of hunger and be like, you know what, I think it's time for me to start making a meal. Somebody with poor interoceptive skills from trauma may be so ravenous that they can't help themselves but to binge, or they maybe let themselves get so run down, like it just kind of they fluctuate and oscillate between the two extremes. Not to mention, obviously trauma can affect self-worth, and that also can affect one's relationship with food. So what we see is often, people might adopt harmful beliefs that they, don't quote unquote deserve to eat, or they may be using food as a reward or a punishment, rather as seeing food as kind of nourishment, and fuel and energy for their body, or pleasure. And they also may believe falsely, of course, that controlling food can kind of help them regain a sense of stability or safety in their life, especially during those times where they feel particularly unsafe or vulnerable. So ultimately, it just kind of creates this cycle where a lot of folks with trauma can cause disordered eating, and disordered eating in a lot of way becomes its own form of body trauma. And so it's
Mhm,
very hard to break that cycle, especially without
mhm.
support.
Yeah, well explained, well described. If somebody finds themselves in that cycle,
Mhm.
um, you gave some recommendations there, but I'm wondering if you have like a go-to first step.
Yeah. Go-to first step, ideally, is, best practice is always to kind of find a trauma-informed therapist or dietitian, especially if there's a food-related component here. You don't need to suffer alone. And I especially like, going back to what I talked about, why I do what I do, which is that the internet is a very scary place for mis and disinformation, especially when it comes to, health, and wellness. And so I often worry that kind of doing your own research online, um, can often do more harm than good. That's
Yes.
not to say that there are not fantastic sources like myself and you, and like there, of course, but it's very hard for the layperson to navigate in the sea of self-help and, experts out there who are really not kind of qualified to be giving advice, never mind individualized advice, which when we're talking about mental health and trauma, recovery is so highly individualized. So I think that's
Mhm.
really important is to kind of seek out someone trained in trauma to really help to explore the underlying themes and the causes for the disordered eating patterns and hopefully offer some kind of safe supportive strategies tailored to your needs.
Yeah. For all the psychology nerds out there, mental health lovers like myself out there, MedCircle produces these series, and the series cover everything from treatments, diagnoses, everything. And we did a whole bunch of series on cognitive behavioral therapy.
Mhm.
But then we did another series on trauma informed cognitive behavioral therapy. And
Mhm.
it's just amazing how effective it is. Okay.
Mhm.
Because I feel like we get all these pieces of advice on the internet or from our therapist or from somebody we trust. And it kind of feels like, okay, is that really going to work? But y'all, a lot of this stuff does work. And so I really encourage everyone to try something. Try
Mhm.
something.
Mhm.
And if that thing doesn't work, all good. We got a
Mhm.
list of things we can go down and try, but try
Totally.
something, and Miss Sharp here has some great insight on what to try. So thank you for sharing that. I
Yeah.
I have a question just because I have a nutritional expert in front of me.
Sure.
What's the best diet?
Oh, what a question.
I know you're like,
Yeah.
oh, thanks a lot for asking that question.
It's funny. So when people say the word diet, they think keto, paleo, whole
Yeah,
30, Weight
yeah,
Watchers.
yeah,
Really, a diet is just a pattern of eating.
yeah.
And while, obviously everyone's needs are going to be unique, I would say of all the patterns of eating out there, the one that we have undoubtedly the best research for and unquestionably benefits across the board is the Mediterranean diet.
Okay.
Hands down, I mean, we've been hearing about it for a long time. This is nothing new, nothing old. But the research is just continuing to mount on all the ways that it benefits folks. And when I say Mediterranean diet, we're really talking about a diet that's rich in fruits and vegetables, mainly plant-based proteins, healthy fats like nuts, olive oil, olives, avocado, and limits things like animal fats like red meat, which again, this is one of the many reasons why when I hear people like claiming that carnivore is the cure for everything, and I'm like,
Mhm.
it's the complete opposite of what we know to be kind of like gold standard when it comes to the best diet or the best kind of dietary pattern. And you don't need to like be overthinking it. It's really kind of just eat more plants. Eat, that's really that's where we see the biggest kind of whoa, 1 second. Okay. Sorry, I got a little kid out
There's
here.
a crash happening. I will echo Abby's sentiments here. I've asked that question to nearly every psychologist and psychiatrist I work with, and even other doctors. All of them say the Mediterranean diet. I mean, I've heard it from every single person I've asked. So to me, I go, there's got to be some truth if I keep hearing it over and over and over again from people I trust. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is
Oh,
that
there we
what
go.
you eat, Mediterranean diet?
Yes, exactly. And we see that there's benefits for a wide range of chronic conditions from, obesity to blood sugar management, insulin resistance, heart health,
Mm,
mental health. It's kind of a no-brainer. And I think like ultimately it's a pattern that you don't need to be in the Mediterranean to uphold,
mm.
but certainly is beneficial for the vast majority of people.
Yeah. Um, do you have strong opinions on beverages?
Yes.
Everyone says we should be drinking water. Okay, let me be very vulnerable here. I probably start the majority of my days with a Red Bull. And
Oh,
it's a Red Bull with the sugar, not the sugar free.
okay.
And then Abby's like, "Oh my gosh." And then throughout the day, I drink a ton of water. I'm just crushing water
Yeah.
all day. But I do start every day, let's just call it every day, with
Yeah.
a Red Bull. How bad is that?
Well, I don't like to demonize anything as good and bad, especially because you know what? Some people can, some people's tolerance and especially for things like caffeine, it's varied. That said, I'm generally not for energy drinks. I think there's enough research now showing that in for a lot of folks, not everyone obviously, but there are risks involved, especially for the heart. And we're talking about mental health here. Certainly not great for cortisol, stress response, anxiety, all of those kinds of things. Especially when you're comparing it to something like coffee, which comes bound up, or tea, I should say, as if we're talking about caffeine sources, which come bound up with a wide range of, really important other kind of nutrition benefits. And so, I mean, again, it's funny because my general rule when it comes to nutrition is I never critique someone's coffee order. So I never tell
Mhm.
someone how to have their coffee. I just see that as like sacred. So like if someone was coming to me and they said I really want to lose weight and they have their coffee in the morning with cream and sugar, I would not say, okay, well we need to now put skim you need to drink it black because
Right.
that's going to ruin their whole day.
Yeah.
And that's not, you have to take these steps in a way that that you can manage it long term. So for
Mhm.
me, if that's your vice, if that's your thing, then it's just like you said, you drink water the rest of the day and you limit your caffeine throughout the rest of the day. And obviously if you're not having adverse effects and your heart is good and your anxiety levels are great, then I don't think that we need to make a big stink out of those things. But generally speaking, it's not something I would like ever recommend people to have it to
Sure.
take up.
And it's interesting because you gave me some weight lifted off with your answer because I also know it's not what I should be doing. I go through
Mhm.
McDonald's and get a quarter pounder with cheese. I know there's a healthier option
Right.
than that, but I also just go for it sometimes. But what I and millions of other people struggle with is the guilt or the shame that we have when we do knowingly reach for something that we think, oh, we could be making a better choice.
Right.
And I think I've been really in recent weeks because I've been thinking about cutting out energy drinks. It's like every morning I met with judgmental Kyle. Judgmental Kyle
Mm.
shows up every morning. And that's not a great way to start my day,
No.
is by judging the
No.
very first thing I do. And so you gave me a little like weight lift there saying, okay, we know, but there are other good things going on. Your heart's good, your anxiety good,
Right.
et cetera, et cetera. I love this
Right.
more holistic look at our health.
It's really important because, a lot of my colleagues like will say things like, guilt is not an ingredient. It shouldn't be something that is like actively in our meals, actively in our day to day. We like carrying around that guilt, that shame over whether or not you had like fries instead of the salad that day at lunch. It's not going to benefit your health. And we have tons of data and research to show that like shaming yourself into making healthy choices doesn't actually work. It generally just creates a shame spiral, which then gets you kind of further into in it down that hole. So kind of having empathy for yourself and self compassion and looking at ways that how can we add things to that diet if that's your thing. If you really wanted fries at lunch, that's okay. Like maybe we're going to pair it with, maybe we're going to have a big salad with dinner and we're going to have some veggies and carrots as a snack later on and things like that. So I think that there's room for all foods in the diet. It's just kind of a matter of the overall picture rather than kind of zooming in on any one meal or snack choice in the day.
I have Crohn's disease. I've lived with it
Mm,
since I was about 18. It's hard for me to get nutrition
yep.
because they took out part of my colon and part of my intestines. So I have to get B12 shots and I have to like really watch what I eat. Um, but what was I asking? Oh, I notice such an impact, Abby, such an
Mm,
impact when I juice
mm,
fruits and vegetables. And especially
right.
if I do heavy vegetables. Now, this stuff does not taste good, y'all. Okay. I'm
No.
not, but it I pound that stuff and I'm like, woohoo! It's awesome.
You feel good.
Yeah, I feel good. That being said, what do you think about drinking our vegetables rather than cooking them or eating them raw?
So, I mean, there's basically nutrition in food exists on a spectrum. And, for a lot of folks, they don't like eating vegetables. They don't like the texture. They don't like, or for a lot of folks who maybe struggle with eating for various reasons, getting in vegetable juice is a great way to get a lot of these micronutrients that are so important. What we miss out on with a juice is the fiber, really.
Mm.
And we also know that the act of kind of chewing, the act of actually like having the food matrix, which includes the fiber, which includes the water, which includes the micronutrients, can all in one. It just makes you feel fuller longer because it takes more time to digest. So where
Oh,
you could consume like 300 calories of a juice with, you could chug that down, like you said, in 5 minutes, you might only feel full for an hour, or you don't even because you're like, well, I'm gonna have the juice and I need a meal. But
yeah.
versus if you were to have a huge, bountiful 300-calorie salad, you're gonna feel way more full for far longer, especially because
Mhm.
it has that fiber in there. And that fiber is really important for digestion, for reducing cholesterol, for reducing blood sugar levels, and very important for overall for building up our gut microbiome. And the gut microbiome is basically the kind of community of microbes in our digestive system. And they are so important for literally every other system in the body. They help control immune system. They control our body weight. They control our mental health. They control blood sugar regulation. Basically anything you can think of, our microbes have a role in. So having that fiber, which is considered the prebiotic, which is what feeds the bacteria or the probiotics in the gut, so important for kind of creating that healthy, rich microbiome that helps to reduce the risk of chronic disease.
It is so fun to chat with you.
Hmm.
If I met you at a bar or a restaurant, I'd be
Yeah.
like, you would be annoyed with me after 40 minutes because I
No,
would
it's
have
all
so
good.
many
I'm
questions.
used to
This
it.
is so interesting and so good. And Abby and I were talking earlier before we started this. I go, we talk about mental health all the time and how important nutrition is and the food we eat and all that stuff. But we don't really we need to be we're not going to be as educated as Abiel, but we can be better educated. And so thank you
Mhm.
for this. So if you are on the Med Circle YouTube channel, I think we have 1.6 million subscribers. If you're watching
Wow.
this, go, it's Abby's Kitchen. Okay, that's what you
Mhm.
got to look at. Abby's Kitchen. I think we put into the description of this video. Start taking care of yourself that way. Start educating yourself that way as well, because this is we all got to eat. We all got to
Mhm.
eat. Might as well do it with more knowledge up here. And if you're on Abby's Kitchen's channel, we're over here at Med Circle. Nice to see you, and thank you for letting us borrow Abby for the interview. My final question, Abby, is about your suggestions on how we can support others on their food journey, and especially their journey if they are in that trauma food cycle that you talked about earlier.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I think about this a lot because I myself kind of struggled with mental illness and an eating disorder. And I often think about, how, what if I wanted to be supported?
Mhm.
And I think one of the most important things is, we know how important the family system is in affecting and being affected by mental health. So, a mental health disorder is not just one individual. It's really it's everybody around them as well. So one of the things I think is really important is to get them involved. Try to keep them in your circle. Invite them to socialize. We know that mental illness and trauma so inherently isolating, and isolation often kind of reinforces that mental illness or trauma. So even if you kind of continue to hear the words like, no, I don't feel like it today, don't stop inviting them altogether because it
Mhm.
really, it really does kind of help them feel valued as a friend and individual. And it opens up opportunities long term for folks to, eventually be like, okay, I'm ready. And that's so it helps them kind of get out when they're ready for it. Also, building up self-esteem. Often, dealing with trauma can result in a lot of hypercritical beliefs about yourself, which can feed into those destructive and self-harming behaviors. So, telling the person what a great person they are and how much you appreciate them in your life, and that you're unconditionally interested in them as a person, rather than, they're not just their mental health disorder or their struggle or their trauma, right? So they are so much more than that. And I think a lot of people really need to be reminded of that. And finally, just like creating regular opportunities for these open discussions without judgment, without shame, without, constantly coming at them with dogmatic advice. You should do this, you shouldn't do this, don't eat that. I think that it's really important to come at and to lead this with curiosity and compassion and empathy, rather than like, this is an intervention and we need to talk kind of thing. It's very important to
Mhm.
keep the door open for when they're ready.
One of my favorite words in mental health is curious.
Yeah.
We're so quick to judge, we're so quick to assume, we're so quick to be blunt. But when
Mhm.
we come curiously, everything changes, especially when we get curious about ourselves instead
Mm.
of judging ourselves, looking at ourselves. You could do curious, curious.
Yep.
Abby, this has been so wonderful. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
sharing all of this. Why don't you give them a rundown on everywhere they can find you?
Yeah. So YouTube is at Abby's Kitchen, Abbeys, Abby's Kitchen. Same with TikTok and Instagram at Abby's Kitchen. I have a brand new podcast called Bite Back with Abbey Sharp. And also a brand new supplement line, evidence-based supplements called New Theory. So it's NEUE theory.com. And yeah, so lots of places you can find great content.
So awesome. Thank you again, Abby. I really appreciate your insight today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for all of our dear viewers watching from both channels, both Abby's and Med Circles. Love seeing you. I did review some of your comments during the stream. I'll make sure to read those after we officially end this interview. I'm Kyle Kittleson. Remember, whatever you're going through, you got this.